When this volcanic island rose from the sea 3 million years ago in a boiling cloud of steam, it was just a barren lump of rock lost in the Indian Ocean. Yet here, in this terribly remote spot, life miraculously gained a hold, as it must have done before elsewhere in other lands. Here is the story of this miracle, the story of an island whose conquistadors are plants and animals from distant places. They've crossed deserts and mountains, braved storms and traversed oceans to land on the coasts of this majestic rock. This island of Réunion is a mere infant in terms of our planet's history and one of humankind's most recent discoveries. This fiery dragon spewing flows of burning lava could have turned the island into a barren hell. Instead, the slopes of the volcano, with their mild tropical climate, offer a vast range of environments, where we can still observe the genesis of a natural Eden today and see how the world garden evolves. This oceanic island is a genuine laboratory of the living world, a witness to the perpetual evolution of nature. Here, men and women are now getting to grips with vital issues. For instance, how will plants and animals that have colonized new lands deal with the arrival of a new species? This remote island in the middle of the ocean is a formidable biological model, but since their arrival just 300 years ago, humans have disrupted its fragile equilibrium. So this is Réunion Island, a volcanic island lying 800 kilometers from Madagascar in the heart of the Indian Ocean. At the end of 1646, a dozen mutineers jailed in Madagascar were banished by the governor. Sentenced to exile, they were marooned on Réunion Island. Although it was thought they would die, the men actually prospered and lived to tell others what they had discovered. Years passed. Hearing about this jewel in the ocean, people came to settle there. Very soon they had transformed the landscape, and some species had been wiped out or forced to retreat to more inaccessible areas. Over the millennia, they crossed the oceans to find a home here, soaring in the clouds, floating on the waves, or swept up by winds. Only winged mammals could reach the island. These giant bats found a haven of peace here. In those days, parakeets gorged themselves on the plentiful fruit. Orchids lodged on twisted trunks, and birds feasted on insects and nectar. There were few or no predators. A population of tortoises, who probably reached the island by drifting on the waves, settled in the forest. After reaching the heart of this Eden, they thrived, and their population grew to an estimated 2 million. Tragically, they were quickly wiped out when humans appeared on the scene. Today, only a few distant cousins have survived on remote islands, and a single specimen, enshrined forever in our memories, remains on Réunion Island. It is kept by Sonia Ribes, director of the Museum of Saint-Denis.
When humans came, they found a true Eden, with masses of tortoises, birds, and parrots. The waters were teeming, and they thought this nature was inexhaustible. They did a lot of hunting, and many birds disappeared because of that. When ships dropped anchor off the island's coast, they filled their holds with tortoises, because these reptiles held a big advantage for the sailors. They could go for months without eating, and so provided lasting stocks of meat.
Et c'est ainsi que les
That's how the
populations de
tortoise
tortues sont
population
passées
fell from an
de
estimated
2
2
millions
million
d'individus, on
specimens to
estime,
zero
à
in
0 en
1840,
1840,
when
puisque
the
la
last one
dernière s'est
died.
éteinte en 1840.
In comparison with nature, humans radically accelerate the colonization process of a territory, bringing change at a furious rate. Fields of cane sugar soon stretched to the horizon, and large numbers of farms appeared to supply the coffee and perfume industries. Some coastal land was totally occupied. Only the inaccessible heights still escaped human influence. Species such as Acacia heterophylla, which had succeeded in colonizing land high up, could continue to live in peace. But for other wildlife on the island, there was a new challenge. Flora and fauna would have to resist and change. Any species that failed to adapt would disappear. With their determination to master nature, the settlers soon irreversibly transformed the luxuriant scenery they had so loved when they first came to the island.
Lorsque les premiers voyageurs sont arrivés, ils ont trouvé une nature luxuriante, mais il y avait très peu de plantes comestibles. Donc, pour que la colonie puisse vivre, il a fallu effectivement faire venir des plantes de l'extérieur. Donc, la Compagnie des Indes a créé un jardin pour acclimater les plantes, et ces plantes, ensuite, elles étaient distribuées aux colons.
In the 18th and 19th centuries, a major wave of plant importation began. The range of climates and richness of the soil enabled species to spread at leisure. Botanical gardens were fashionable at the time, and one was opened in Saint-Denis with the aim of enriching the colony by the introduction of new cash crops. In 1817, the first accredited botanical gardener, Nicolas Brion, already counted more than 1,100 plant species introduced onto the island. For 3 million years, nature had allowed one species to settle on the island every 10,000 years. But since the arrival of humans, 10 species had become naturalized each year. The new colonists had multiplied the colonization rate by 100,000.
Parmi les plantes qui ont été introduites, beaucoup étaient des arbres fruitiers ou des légumes, mais un certain nombre de ces plantes se sont échappées du jardin et sont devenues ce qu'on appelle des pestes végétales. C'est le cas de la vigne marronne qui a été introduite dans le jardin.
Plants can become invasive. The giant bramble, a harmless rubus in its native ecosystem, has grown hard to control and destructive here, a real pest plant. Christophe Lavergne, a specialist in invasive species of the Conservatoire Botanique National des Mascarins, accompanied by Stéphane Barré of the CIRAD, is studying this species in a natural environment.
Ah tiens, il y a du rubus.
Ah, there's some rubus there.
Ouais. Ouais, mais en plus, il y a,
In fact,
les
there are
deux
both
espèces.
species.
Ah, super. Ah, bon. On va faire les mesures.
We'll take the measurements now. We'll put the case down over there.
Donc vous avez Rubus
So you
acéphalius,
have a
le
Rubus
raisin marron, qui est
alcifolius,
donc
the
très
giant
envahissant à
bramble
la
from Asia,
Réunion,
which
qui
is
nous
very
vient d'Asie.
invasive on Réunion
Et là
Island.
vous avez une
And
autre
here you have
ronce,
another bramble,
un
another
autre
rubus,
Rubus apetalis,
apetalis,
qui est
an
une
indigenous
plante
plant
indigène
that
qui
fits
s'intègre
perfectly into
parfaitement
our
à notre
environment,
environnement,
which existed
qui
before
existait
humans
avant
came
l'arrivée
here.
de l'homme ici.
So
Donc
this
celle-ci
one
n'est pas
isn't
envahissante.
invasive.
Using this very sophisticated apparatus, Stéphane Barré measures photosynthetic activity in the leaves of two plant species.
What I suggest is that we take measurements on 10 leaves on this lower part of the Rubus apetalis and 10 leaves on the Rubus alcifolius, and after that, we'll move on to the scapes.
He decides to begin with the plant judged invasive.
What's the reading?
522.
We'll try there.
I'll try this one. 875.
Toutes les plantes utilisent l'énergie
All plants
solaire
use solar
qu'elles vont
energy, which
transformer
they
en
turn
énergie
into chemical
chimique.
energy,
Et c'est cette
and it's
énergie
this
chimique
chemical
que la
energy
plante va
that the
pouvoir
plant can
utiliser
use to develop
pour
better,
mieux se développer,
grow better,
mieux
so
croître,
be more
et donc être
competitive in
plus
relation
compétitive
to other
l'une par
plants.
rapport à l'autre. Cet appareil donc
This
permet de
apparatus
mesurer
measures
l'activité
photosynthetic
photosynthetique
activity.
et ça va
It'll
nous
show
permettre
us
de
how
voir
sturdy the
quelle est la
plant is
vigueur de la
according
plante
to the
en
position of its
fonction de
leaves
la
and
position
give
des
us a
feuilles
better
sur la
idea
plante
of the growth
et d'avoir une
capacity of
meilleure
each
idée
of
des
the two
capacités de
species.
croissance de chacune des deux espèces.
299.
He also takes measurements lower down.
Donc
So,
d'après les mesures, là, on
according to the
s'aperçoit du moins
measurements,
sur les
we
axes
see,
végétatifs
at least on the
que la
vegetative
ronce
stems,
envahissante
that the invasive
a des valeurs
bramble
33%
has values
supérieures à la ronce
33%
indigène.
higher
Donc elle
than the
sera plus
native bramble,
compétitive que la
so it will
ronce
be more
indigène.
competitive than the native bramble.
Exposed to the same light as its cousin from Réunion Island, the giant bramble is more efficient. Originally from Java and Sumatra, it evolved for millennia on a continent where there were predators everywhere, making it aggressive. Here, it's relentlessly stifling an endemic fern to occupy fresh territory. These latest intruders are a new threat for the original wildlife. Those environments where the number of species is lowest prove the most vulnerable to biological invasion. In this respect, islands are easier targets than continents. With the arrival of the latest invaders, this island, whose many enchanting landscapes have been slowly evolving for 3 million years, is now experiencing major disruption. Humans have left their mark on this ecological paradise, but now some of them are beginning to study the changes made by their arrival. Samuel Coutelia, an insect specialist, has decided to inventory the species present on the Étang de Saint-Paul, the largest lake in the archipelago, and one of its last remaining areas of wetland.
In terms of insects, I think that the fauna is more or less the same. We find the same species of dragonfly as there were 300 or 400 years ago, so we can suppose that the insects are still fairly representative of the original fauna. Many species that have been found on Mauritius haven't been found on Réunion Island yet. That isn't necessarily because they don't exist on Réunion Island, it's because we haven't come across them yet. My job is to search for these species to complete the list. Once we have those lists, we can move on to the next stage, which is the protection of ecosystems and therefore the species that live there.
Back in 1801, this 400-hectare, 1,000-acre lake slowly began to die. A new plant had been introduced into its aquatic environment, a simple reed. Then, at the end of the 19th century, the invader was gradually replaced by another, the water hyacinth, which proliferated everywhere, taking over the entire area. Once present in great numbers, native and migratory birds could no longer find the food they needed to survive. And although insects have a short reproductive cycle and can adapt in just a few thousand years, such repeated invasions may be fatal to them.
It's a pest plant, one from South America.
C'est embêtant parce que ça modifie quand même complètement le milieu et ça obstrue énormément les zones d'eau libre.
So instead of having
Donc au lieu
water
d'avoir
open
de
to
l'eau
the air,
avec un
over quite a
contact
large
quand même
area,
large avec l'air,
we have this plant which
on a
totally
cette
covers
plante
the
qui
surface of
obstrue
the water.
totalement la surface de l'eau.
If the environment disappears totally, there's no possibility of adapting anymore. It has to move elsewhere.
So, do the native species that arrived on the island by themselves have no chance of survival? Will this environment disappear forever? If there is to be any hope of saving these environments, it is important to study their ecosystems and species. They must be inventoried continually, both in the daytime and at night. That is how, in 2000, Nicolas Cliquenois, an entomologist, discovered a stick insect, since named Apterographia reunionensis. Its ancestors came from Southeast Asia, but the insect is perfectly endemic, since it's totally dependent on an endemic tree, the red cabbage palm.
J'étais à la Réunion depuis peu,
I'd only been on Réunion Island for a short time, so I investigated all the environments to see if there wasn't anything new to discover. I knew that if I was going to find new things, I had to search in environments that hadn't been examined much before. One day I went down into a valley into the heights of Saint-Philippe. As soon as night fell, I began to check the leaves of a cabbage palm with my torch and very soon came across this thick insect. I immediately realized it was new to Réunion and very probably to science. So afterwards, it took some research to establish that it was a new species endemic to Réunion Island and a genus endemic to the Mascarene Islands, since it had a cousin on Round Island to the north of Mauritius.
On this island, which has fortunately remained unspoiled in places, it is still possible to discover and study species as yet unknown to experts.
3 months after discovering the species, I found a second one that was also new to science. In terms of Coleoptera, for instance, or even Orthoptera, each year we make 5, 6, 10 discoveries. There are still lots of things to be discovered in terms of insects on Réunion Island.
Two new Apterus, or wingless species, have been described within a new genus. These recent discoveries show the great importance of continuing to study the fauna of Réunion Island. These species have evolved in parallel with their host plant over millennia. The threat facing the wild red cabbage palm also threatens the survival of this species of stick insect, which could die out if the plant it feeds on were to vanish from its natural environment. The red cabbage palm has suffered greatly from intensive harvesting. Its heart is prized as a delicacy by the island's population, and adult wild palms have almost entirely disappeared. Only a few specimens are left on the heights and in remote areas.
It's distinctive in terms of food. It's strictly dependent on the cabbage palm, so it refuses to eat any other food. It would rather starve to death than accept any other plant species. That's actually its weak point, because the cabbage palm, in the wild at least, is very much endangered on Réunion Island because it's poached regularly. This means that in the medium term, the species is actually endangered, because once the cabbage palms disappear from the forest, it will disappear with them. And it won't be the only one, because there are actually other insects, including a cricket and also I think a Coleoptera, which are strictly dependent on this plant and will disappear with it if the poaching doesn't stop.
Although the sites where the wild red cabbage palm grows may disappear, plantations of the same palm are thriving, so its survival is not threatened. However, the wild red cabbage palm must be saved to protect the native insects that will only feed on that variety. The rare natural sites where it can still be found are very far apart from each other. The insects cannot cross cultivated land, a barrier to them. So the fragmentation of environments prevents the populations of stick insects from getting to their favorite plants or each other. The plant needs to be conserved in its natural environment, not for its own survival, but for the insects living on it. Otherwise, in some places, certain animals have been able to take advantage of environments changed by human hand. Population levels of bittern and to a lesser extent the shy retiring moorhen, the only freshwater birds nesting on Réunion Island, had fallen sharply. Today their numbers are increasing because of a new source of food inside and around the farm. This fish farm near the Temps Salé is just the thing for a female bittern, making it easy for her to raise her young. A peaceful coexistence has grown between humans and these birds. Since settlers arrived 350 years ago, a mere blink of the eye in terms of the Earth's history, the environments on Réunion Island have changed. Scientists have used these developments to gain a better understanding of how endemic species adapt to a world that humans have changed. In the heart of the virgin forest, Fabrice Blard, a myrmecologist, sets off in search of his protégés.
It's really an excellent environment to find this kind of species. In general, they use old tree stumps that have been previously infested by termites. They don't go to much trouble. They seem quite happy to occupy old stumps.
There are two endemic species which reach the island without human assistance, probably on floating logs. These ants play a double role. They're formidable predators and regulators of the environment. The species he is studying today is the Camponotus maculatus.
In terms of diet, we imagine it's omnivorous, so it will feed on other little insects. The thing to remember is that we're generally right to say that ants are good predators, so they regulate other insect populations. They're useful in exactly that way. They're small, sometimes even tiny, but they have a very important role to play in ecosystems.
Ants have a highly varied diet. Camponotus ants are omnivorous, eating both plants and animal proteins. But a large number are carnivorous. They are fearsome predators, favoring a diet of insects and arthropods. This species, originally from Madagascar, was once very common on Réunion Island. Today, it's in sharp decline. Some areas of the island where large colonies are still to be found act as sanctuaries for the species. But for how much longer?
What's distinctive about Réunion Island is that there's a very high proportion of introduced species. We suppose that the main factor in the arrival of ants on Réunion Island was humans. It's a relatively young island and relatively remote from any potential source of other species, which is why there are so few endemic species.
Today, among the 27 species of ant on Réunion Island, 4 are known for their invasive nature. Their impact on endemic species, such as Camponotus, has not yet been established. However, the local fauna generally has few resources that enable it to resist competitors, such as invasive species. A great deal of research has shown how introduced ants can drive out local species, which must then try to survive as best they can, often settling for leftovers. Sometimes the extinction of a weaker colony is inevitable, but as a rule, competing colonies of different species divide territory between them, with the lion's share going to the victor, of course.
When ants of two species meet, there is a response gradient. In the best case, they actually ignore each other. In the worst, they fight until one of them is dead. Apparently, Camponotus is markedly less aggressive and generally prefers to run away from a fight, so they choose flight rather than direct confrontation. But if they were to clash with another much more aggressive invasive species than the myrmex, I think they'd be overcome by the numbers and have no chance of survival.
From the ant to the tortoise and Acacia heterophylla to red latins, no animal or plant has remained unscathed by the arrival of human settlers. Similarly, the ecosystems have been hit by the presence of humans. Only 60% of mountain forest and just 1% of lowland moist forest remain. This steady decline over the last 150 years has essentially been caused by human activities. Excessive logging of rare species of tree, intensive clearing, the importation of exotic species, and the fragmentation of environments are all factors that seriously threaten the island's biodiversity. The millennial balance of nature in the wild has been overturned. Here, as on the continents, the situation is alarming. Even at a height of 2,500 meters, the results of human colonization just a few centuries ago can be seen. Although no people have settled on the island's still unspoiled heights, their very presence below is endangering species that have peacefully evolved in their remote fastnesses for millions of years with no real predators. Mathieu Lecour, a specialist in endemic petrels, inspects burrows and also observes the damage caused by the arrival of humankind.
This is a burrow. We'll have a look at what's in it. Bones, first of all. A skull. Lower and upper mandibles. I think it must have been an adult. It's been gnawed.
Bon, il y a toujours de la mortalité dans
always
les colonies de
mortality in
pétrels,
petrel
dans les colonies
colonies,
gazonnières
in
en
seabird
général.
colonies generally.
Là, on peut pas
Here, you
dire
can't say whether it's
si c'est de la
predation or
prédation
natural.
ou si c'est naturel. Souvent, on peut dire si
You can
vraiment il y a de
often
la
see if it's
prédation sur
really
des cadavres beaucoup
predation
plus
with
frais
much
ou par
fresher
exemple
carcasses, or for instance,
les cadavres
if
sont
the carcasses are
décapités et les
decapitated and the
muscles du
wishbone muscles
bréchet
are eaten.
sont mangés. Les chats,
That's the
ça
mark of
c'est la
cats.
signature des chats, quoi.
In bringing predators such as rats and cats here, humans dealt a fatal blow to many species that had been quietly going about their business for millennia in this unique environment, a world free of predators. Living a totally sheltered life in the heart of Eden, the living world here had never been forced to learn to defend itself and was not tough enough to wage such a war of worlds. This young petrel has been luckier than some of its fellows. It has escaped the claws of the ravenous cats. Since its parents abandoned it a few days ago, hunger has brought it out of its burrow and will force it to take flight and find food out at sea.
On est dans la dernière phase de
phase
l'élevage,
of raising the
c'est-à-dire
young
que les
birds.
adultes
In other
ont
words,
arrêté de
the
nourrir les
adults
poussins
stopped
depuis
feeding the chicks
déjà
a few
quelques
days
jours,
ago now,
et donc les
so
poussins
they're
perdent du poids.
losing weight.
Et donc c'est cette perte de
It's
poids en
actually
fait
this
qui
weight
va à un
loss that
moment les
forces them to
forcer à
leave the
sortir
burrow
du
in the
terrier,
end.
à commencer à battre des
They start to
ailes,
beat their
s'entraîner
wings,
et finalement
practice, and finally
s'envoler.
take off.
Et quand ils commencent à
When they
sortir du
first emerge
terrier, il y a
from
un
the burrow,
premier
there's an
danger,
initial
c'est
danger.
les chats qui sont introduits, qui ont
Cats that have
envahi
been introduced and
pratiquement
have
toutes les colonies
invaded
de
virtually
pétrels,
all the petrel
qui vont donc
colonies.
s'attaquer à ces grands
They
poussins
attack
et les
these
tuer pour les
fledglings
manger.
and kill and eat
Et
them.
ensuite, ceux qui survivent à cette prédation par les chats,
Those that survive the cat predation
par une nuit
leave
sans
on a
lune,
moonless
vont
night
décider de
in
partir dans le
April.
courant du mois d'avril. Et là, ils rencontrent
They face another very
un
serious
autre
danger,
très grave danger,
artificial
c'est les
lighting,
éclairages artificiels
which attracts them.
qui les attirent.
Humans have not only brought predatory animals with them, they've also introduced lighting, which attracts the young birds, diverting them from their path out to sea. With their large wingspan, these birds can only take off from promontories, not from the ground. Only rescue can save them from imminent death. April and May are fatal months for the young Barrows petrels. On their way to the ocean, they're drawn off course by artificial lighting and find themselves coming down on the ground. Realizing they cannot prevent the young petrels from crash landing, men and women have set up a rescue service.
Oui. On va remplir la fiche maintenant? Oui. D'accord. Allez, on y va.
Many inhabitants help in this task. All over the island, they've organized a network to collect birds trapped on the ground and release them later. This ad hoc solution to protect the petrel population saves a number of birds from certain death, although others who come down on the road are less lucky. Humans brought essentials to their new home, domestic animals, lighting, and edible plants, but also luxuries, apparently harmless oriental plants. Christophe Rouvière, an expert in the field of invasive species, tracks down all plants imported by humans.
L'hortensia, il est cultivé en le multipliant par des boutures. Donc on l'a planté à partir de boutures, pas à partir de graines. On contrôlait bien, il était sur le bord de la route, dans nos jardins. On ne s'était jamais posé la question, est-ce qu'il était capable de s'échapper? Et visiblement, récemment, on vient de découvrir qu'il est capable de retourner un peu à l'état sauvage, quoi.
The hydrangea has escaped and returned to the forest. This fabulous laboratory of life can show us what may happen to the world in the near future.
Il est dans un endroit
It's
où
in
il
a
y a de l'eau
place
qui passe,
where
une
water
ravine.
runs in a
On
ravine.
peut supposer
So
qu'il
we can
vient
suppose it came
d'au-dessus,
from
où
above,
il a été planté,
where it was
où il y a
planted.
des petits morceaux de
Or
rameaux
little
qui
bits
sont
of branch
peut-être
may have
descendus
come
avec
down
l'eau
with
et
the
puis
water
ça a
and then
poussé
it
ici.
grew here.
Donc visiblement aussi
The
la
plant
plante
seems
a
to
l'air
be sterile
stérile,
here, although
bien que
there
là on
it
dirait
looks
qu'il y a
as
des
if the
fruits
fruit
qui
is
se sont
grown.
formés. Donc est-ce que ces
So
fruits
is
sont
this fruit
viables ou
viable
pas?
or
Est-ce
not?
qu'il est capable de
Can
se
it spread
multiplier
through
par
seed?
graines? On ne sait pas.
We don't know. The
La
biology
biologie
of
de
the
cette
plant is
plante-là
not
est
well
pas
known.
bien connue.
But in
Mais
any
en tout
case,
cas, il
it's
s'est
escaped
échappé.
and has
Visiblement,
even visibly
il est
become
devenu
invasive.
envahissant même.
For a long time, people have planted hydrangeas on Réunion Island, thinking they were perfectly controlled because they needed human assistance to reproduce. But a few years ago, they became naturalized, and wild hydrangeas appeared. The phenomenon underlines nature's amazing ability to constantly evolve and adapt to gain new footholds. On the slopes of the volcano and in the heart of the virgin forest, the situation is just as alarming. Michel Escure of the French National Office of Forests, the ONF, has decided to tackle a pest plant long seen as a danger to the equilibrium of the forest, the giant bramble.
Ici, à l'ombre,
Here in the shade,
couverture du
we're
sol,
virtually 100% ground
sur cette
cover
petite zone
in
à
this little
100%,
area
déjà
already taken
prise
over
par
by
des
fern.
fougères, nous ne
We
voyons
don't
pas
see
de
any
marronne.
giant bramble.
Par contre, là où
However,
nous sommes,
on this spot,
effectivement,
where
vous
there's an
trouvez,
opening,
et
it
tout de suite, elle se
immediately
propage.
spreads.
Autrement dit,
In other words,
effectivement,
Rubus
la vigne marronne
alcifolius,
est
the giant bramble, is a
une naissance
heliophilous
héliophile.
species. It likes
Elle
the
aime le
sun.
soleil. Voilà.
Right.
Ici,
Here's
donc
the
c'est
stem
la
that
tige
comes
qui
from
vient
the
du pied,
stalk,
alimentation de la
fed
racine
from the
par
roots,
ici. Et là,
and
vers
then
le soleil,
towards
vers
the
la
sun,
lumière,
towards the
une
light,
pousse
is a
toute
very
jeune.
young shoot.
Elle est très longue,
It's very
elle peut
long.
avoir,
It may be,
c'est pas vieux,
it's not old.
ça peut avoir 4
It may be 4 to 6
mois,
months
même
old.
pas.
Not even that when you see the growth.
2 mois.
2 months.
Vous voyez les
You see the
longueurs?
length?
Donc, ce
What
qu'elle
it's
va
going
faire,
to do,
c'est là où elle présente
and this
un
is where
danger,
it presents a risk,
c'est qu'elle se
is propel
propulse,
itself
on va
towards the
dire, vers les
treetops.
cimes, et puis
It climbs
progressivement,
steadily,
elle s'accroche, elle
hangs
monte,
on, constricts the
et
top
elle
of the tree,
enserre le
and
houppier
stifles it.
et l'étouffe.
The giant bramble has all the specific characteristics of an invasive species. Not only great longevity, but also early sexual maturity and high seed production. It is definitely a dominant species. The ONF teams that manage the forests have attempted to control and eliminate it over the years, but without success.
Il est
On
arrivé
occasion,
qu'on soit face
we've
à des
seen
murs
8 to
de
10
vignes
meter
marronnes de
walls
8
of
à 10
giant
mètres,
bramble.
des murs, le tapis
The carpet
de
of
racines
entangled
emmêlées
roots
de cette
of the
vigne
giant
marronne,
bramble,
tout ça,
all that
qui peut être très
can be
long,
very
des fois,
long,
qui peut mesurer 6
measuring
mètres de
6
long.
to 8 meters.
Toute cette
And the
partie-là,
part
représentant
corresponding
des
to living
épaisseurs
and dead layers,
vivantes ou
1.5
mortes
meters in
de
height.
1,50 m de hauteur. Donc tout
So
ça, il
not the
faut,
slightest
pour
living
ne pas
sprig must be
laisser
left in the
le
ground.
moindre brin vivant dans le sol. Donc on est obligé
We
de
have to get
débarrasser de
rid
tout
of it
ça.
all.
Ce qui ne devait pas être
That
fait,
can't have been done
je
before,
suppose, quand
apparently.
il y avait,
No one paid that sort of
auparavant, on
attention
n'avait pas la
then.
même
There
attention,
weren't the same
on n'avait pas les
ecological
mêmes
concerns
préoccupations
either.
écologiques non plus.
So a plant found a paradise with human help. Then, with the benefit of its previous continental evolution, it dominated all the native species that had thrived peacefully here for 3 million years, far from anywhere, on an island sheltered from aggression.
pouvait être fait à ce moment-là, c'était justement de laisser au contact du sol des éléments comme celui-ci, de la tige émanent des racines qui vont plus tard donner naissance à une autre tige qui va partir d'ici. Et là, l'extension est permanente, rayonnante et permanente.
Whatever humans tried, the giant brambles sprang up again. The situation was alarming. Nothing and no one could destroy it. On Réunion Island, so young geologically and still rapidly changing, we can study the arrival of other species introduced by humanity into this biological Eden, such as this Kahili ginger, with its ornamental flowers and delightful scent.
Elle est originaire de l'Himalaya, elle est introduite pour ses fleurs. Et dans le temps, elle faisait du parfum aussi avec ses fleurs. Puis, elle s'échappait des jardins, puis envahit les forêts. Et elle est capable de croître en sous-bois, à l'ombre, et puis elle se multiplie très très vite. Donc elle occupe beaucoup d'espace, elle fait beaucoup d'ombre aussi. Ses feuilles sont assez larges, elles filtrent la lumière qui arrive au sol. Donc pour moi, c'est vraiment une des pires pestes végétales qu'on ait à La Réunion.
In these extraordinary biotopes, where the recent penetration of an exotic plant can be observed and its spread studied, Christophe Rouvière analyzes the situation and tries to find better strategies for the future.
On pense pouvoir aider l'écosystème en éliminant la plante envahissante, mais on ne s'est jamais posé la question de savoir est-ce que finalement de l'enlever, ça ne va pas induire des effets plus négatifs qu'on le pensait. Ça n'a jamais été mesuré. On est en train de le tester.
To do so, Christophe Rouvière cleared a plot covered in Kahili ginger. After several months, the scientist has returned to the plot to see how nature has reclaimed the bare earth. He measures the new species that have grown over the surface of 1 square meter to see whether pulling up the Kahili ginger has had a beneficial effect on this small area of forest.
Alors, Clematis mauritiana.
Clematis mauritiana. There are 3 of them.
J'en ai vu 3 sur la placette. Alors, il y a du goyavier.
There's guava too.
Il y a le Molinia
alternifolia.
Un rubus.
A rubus.
Ok, alors 8.
Après l'arrachage du longose,
now the Kahili ginger has been pulled up, there are actually 10 or so pioneer species growing again, so it's related to their dynamics. Once the site's disturbed, it's normal to see the native pioneer plants growing again, but there are also non-native plants that appear, which weren't there before, like the giant bramble, Coral ardicia, the guava, and others too. But above all, the great drawback is that the Kahili ginger returns. After 7 months, you find the same density of plantlet as before treatment, so actually, operating in this way in a forest widely invaded by Kahili ginger isn't much use.
Alors encore un juvénile.
Another juvenile slug
de
under the
Yalimax
leaf.
maillardi sous la feuille. On dirait qu'il y a eu des pontes, hein, il y a beaucoup de petits.
Christophe Rouvière is forced to concede that not only has the Kahili ginger made a strong comeback, but it's now accompanied by new invasive species that were probably lying dormant in the soil. So the attempt to control the Kahili ginger has failed, and the situation is even worse than before. He also notes that some small snails and slugs have moved onto the Kahili ginger. It can be hoped that these endemic species are adapting to the exotic plant. So, when an invasive species is in place, destroying it can result in more damage than if it is allowed to flourish.
Le longose constitue des habitats très favorables à certaines espèces, même endémiques, comme une petite limace transparente. On trouve abondamment sur les feuilles de longose, et c'est sûr que quand on l'arrache, qu'on supprime cette espèce de l'écosystème, c'est un petit peu l'hécatombe pour les escargots. C'est-à-dire qu'on va voir des densités d'escargots diminuer, et aussi le nombre d'espèces. À peu près 2 espèces sur 6 disparaissent. Donc, conclusion, dans un cas comme la forêt des Macs qui est très envahie par le mongose, la meilleure chose à faire, ce serait finalement de ne pas intervenir. C'est encore ce qui perturbe le moins le milieu et qui finalement ne change pas grand-chose de le laisser. C'est ce qui est le plus bénéfique finalement pour l'écosystème.
After importing exotic species immoderately, humanity must act. But here on this island of unique ecosystems, recent observations seem to contradict the theories saying that invasive species must be eradicated at any cost. Perhaps nature should be left to handle matters in its own way after all. So, over 3 centuries of human occupation, Réunion Island has experienced an accelerated version of the entire history of humanity. Settlers arrived in the heart of this Garden of Eden and adapted to its environments and climate conditions. But today, they face a terrible conclusion. They have disrupted the island's ecological balance in 100 ways, and it will take a great deal of hard work to save its wildlife. The highlands are a little better preserved because there's less human activity and some exotic plants cannot adapt to conditions there. Although the authorities are trying to curb the process of invasion on the island, it is continually accelerating. The increase in air and sea travel worldwide encourages the penetration of new species at a rate 100,000 times greater than when nature, free of human interference, reigned alone over the island. Although Réunion Island is one of the best conserved ocean islands in the world today, since 30% of its territory is still intact and preserved, we can try to imagine its future. How much longer can this sanctuary continue to exist? What will humans do with it? Sharing the island intelligently with its wildlife has become a priority for its inhabitants. Everyone has decided to join in the struggle despite the difficulties ahead. For wild nature, the arrival of humans has brought a new challenge. It has to change and resist, and those species that fail to adapt die out. On this island, this open-air laboratory where we can observe the future of the Earth's evolution, the situation is alarming. How will this war of worlds end? Does nature have no other choice for survival today than to retreat to places that humanity cannot reach?